What if your client lives more than 100, even 120 years? What if your compliance framework was not designed for multi-generational management or even capturing clients for more than 80 years? Now, why is longevity so much of an importance, and why it's not only a trend, but it's a frontier for compliance? In this episode of the Compliance Coach, you will learn three things. Number one is, what is longevity and what is the impact already as of today? Number two is, what are the main risks for compliance and the financial sector? And number three is, why are the silver foxes back in compliance and why they might to circumvent the algorithm? Stay with me tuned on this channel. My name is Ralf Ebert. I'm the Compliance Coach. More than 25 years of experience in compliance. I'm here to guide you, give you advice and insights, thinking and impacting compliance differently. Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Compliance Coach. Today we talk about longevity, and some of you might ask yourself if we are drifting far away from the compliance topics. Last time about mindfulness, even motorcycling. So the truth is that more and more people in Switzerland are getting more than 83 years old. And that, of course, has an impact in terms of how they're managing and what kind of products can you offer. What was good for when they were 40, 45 might be as a portfolio management, not be good when they're 80. So how can we deal with that? How we can manage that? How can portfolios remain compliant over times? And of course, how from a complexity perspective, we can address today's clients' needs if they're getting older, meaning vulnerable to fraud, to understanding of how apps are working. These kind of insights we will make in this kind of short episode. Stay tuned on this one. So if we look now on a compliance side, on the risk side, when it comes to longevity and clients, what are the main risk drivers in this sense? And of course, first of all, it's suitability. Why a client's product, when he bought it at the age of 30, is now at 60 still okay, or even at 80 still okay. So that is something that we need to address in terms of how can we make a product over a life cycle and a client life cycle still valid? Second one is, of course, and that is unfortunately increasing very much, is the detecting the diminished capacity of your client. Meaning, what happens if your client is giving suddenly POAs to people that you never heard of? That transactional behavior has completely changed, and a 70-year-old client is suddenly spending thousands and thousands in credit card spendings. That might be something that you would like to reveal. The same element applies when we come to longevity in terms of wealth transfers. In former times, the kind of wealth transfer was only a one-off situation, one-off event happening very rarely in time. Now, in the times where we see sometimes even 3 generations still living and coming to the age of being a bank's client, that might change, and you might as well change of how you address it and how you talk to them, what kind of product offering you're doing this. And of course, last but not least, from a risk perspective, is the always famous KYC, know your client. Why is that so important? Because, of course, if somebody is in the 30s or 40s, working, gaining money, and then getting in retirement, the KYC changes completely. The spendings are changing completely, and that needs to be built in, captured, and taken care of from a compliance perspective. So how we do this? Let's have a look. We have seen in the financial market all over, threats from externals are getting more and more important. If you look on the cyber criminality, fraud in general. Now, with a long aging population and a client that is 80, this kind of risk becomes even more and more important. Meaning, he is much or she is much more exposed to these kind of abuses coming from family members, from the environment, etc. So you as a bank, or in particular as a compliance officer, you are now bound to recognize this, identify whether there is a change of this pattern and why it's so important. I'll give you an example. Sometimes, for instance, if you have sometimes the son stepping in with the POA and completely financing his spending by buying very expensive real estate, that might be in the wealth generation already. It's part of the transfer of the wealth between the generations, but it might be as well that the family member is using or abusing the power that it has been given to him or her by just spending a lavish lifestyle. And so how to detect that and how to clarify that, it's always very difficult. So my personal view on this one is, especially if we talk in private banking, where those kind of impacts are much more important than we see that, for instance, in retail activities, is the contact to the client is very important, regardless of where it comes from. Normally, you should at least insist that your relationship manager is seeing the client at least for once or twice a year to make that happen with a good contact note. On the other hand, it's very important as well that whenever there's an event, transaction, for instance, happening, or a pattern that has been identified in the transaction monitoring, that even compliance officers are reaching out. And I know this is the hard stuff for some of our compliance functions. Even compliance officers will need to get into the picture in terms of discussing with the client what is happening and why is that. So not only listening to the telephone calls which have been conducted by the RMs, but being moreover as well taking ownership in that regard, because you will very often come to a position where you think, is the client really in 100% capacity of doing so, or does it make really 100% of an idea that he or she has given a POA to somebody? So that is very often the position on the edge to find that out. And our compliance programs are very much static, and they do not take that into consideration. So I think first action item for you is to ask yourself whether your compliance program, whether it's in transaction monitoring, the request, how you interact with RMs or what is expected from them, is in line with the aging population on clients and whether it's really fit for purpose. Now the question is, how do we prepare for that from a compliance and from banking perspective to avoid these elements? Because it is certainly an issue that is more and more as well reported in the media, and of course the bank gets very much exposed whenever we are violating those key and core elements. But don't forget that even from a regulatory point of view, very often we are limited, meaning we have limitations when it comes to data use by GDPR, Data Protection Acts, etc., which could indicate very often already a health problem of your client. Now, if you're not allowed to put that in your core banking system by saying, I have a topic with my client because I think he or she has cognitive problems whenever I call her, that she doesn't recognize me immediately. So if you avoid that from a data protection problem, you get exposed on the abuse perspective or fraud perspective that you didn't take the right measures. So what I can only invite us to do is creating already at a very early moment the longevity elements in the KYC, meaning repetitively asking yourself, is that in line of what the client is doing, and should we not restrict that to a certain age? Don't get me wrong, it's not like then limiting driver licenses on the highways for elderly people by saying, okay, we block them by default so that only limited transactions can take place. But to a certain extent, we might as well apply or need to apply higher due diligence or higher vigilance when it comes to those elderly populations, same as what we would do for high-risk relationships, I guess. Now, some of our banks have already established those kind of procedures to detect vulnerabilities and how to address it, who does detect it. But the first and the very first point in a client life cycle is the relationship manager. So here, I guess the most important thing is to provide training to relationship managers to be very clear and take additional steps whenever it comes to client meetings, etc. Having a look on Is the client really reactive to what I say? Does he really gives me the impression that the person understands what they are signing? Is there always a third person present in this regard? I'll give you a very stupid example. In my previous role, I saw, for instance, that an elderly man has been accompanied to all the meetings by his driver. And the driver was getting a lot of cash money that the client asked for cash withdrawals immediately. That might be as well a very bad sign that something is not happening just to help people, but there's a financial interest. So that is what we need to insist for the relationship managers to be trained and to capture that at the very first moment. And last but not least, what I mentioned before, in our KYC lifetime client reviews need to be as well to construed so that they can embed these kind of circumstances that a person of 30 or 40 after living the personal career and then stepping into retirement changes as well the behavior, but not only the behavior, but as well the interest in financial products. Of course, will not get as a source of income a salary, but will moreover rely on proceeds from investments. And so we need to capture that and to put more strength on those essentials if you want to deal with longevity on a compliance perspective. Now, very often we are asked, like, what are the regulators doing on longevity? Or are banks are just taking their stances and their positions because they feel they need to? Very interesting. So we had a quick look into the data, and on this level, you see that the Swiss regulator FINMA, for instance, emphasizes client protection and suitability throughout the life cycle, moreover in whenever they produce or establish any kind of position papers. Nothing so far written in law from a regulatory point of view, but whenever it comes to a more substantial communication from the authorities, that is being proposed. The EU, however, is already a step in front of us because they launched already consultation under the Green Paper on Aging. So very interesting to follow that one. And in terms of what are the proposals and what is done on this level. And in the UK, for instance, the FCA encouraged already proactive elder vulnerability safeguards. What do we mean by that? Is, for instance, NatWest seems to be quite innovative on this level. They have already mobile branches which are driving out moreover in the rural parts and dealing with elderly people. Or, for instance, they're even sending their personal bank stuff to elder people at home to fill out templates, re-actualize the KYC. Now, don't get me wrong, in private banking it might be difficult for this one to have RMs getting all over out in the place, but I think it's a very interesting already first move to capture it and to try to deal with this. And what we have seen already in the past on all kind of, let me say, vulnerable topics when it comes to compliance, the better it is already to take a proactive approach and to try to address it than waiting for regulatory stances to come into place, because then very often you get already at the back of the line and need to reply on a justify modus rather than like by saying, we have seen it, we have identified it, we have put in controls. Might be always something that we could do better, but we have already embedded the ethical part when it comes to longevity in compliance. So I think that is, from a what you can do perspective, quite important. Hey, thank you very much for welcome back to the secret part of the Compliance Coach and the power of the Silverfoxes. Why is that so important? Because in a recent article published by the Corporate Compliance and Ethics Society, they revealed that 60% of the chief compliance officers are above 50 plus. Is that a coincidence? No, I would say it's even a pattern or a consequence. And why is that so in times of AI tools, ChatGPT, apps, name it, is because trust is always the dividing element. What do I mean by that? For instance, when I had roughly several years ago discussions with the European Central Bank on bookings outside Europe, they were not interested in the facts. They know it already. They were interested in getting someone in front of them that they could trust. Same applies whenever you come in panic boardroom discussions. For instance, the Arab Spring, I remember that very well for a Swiss bank, when people got completely crazy by saying, hey, what do we do? What is the next step to be taken? You need to have people in place that are very resilient, that know what to do, that of course have the skill set, but that in addition to that, knows of how to deal with people, this kind of what we called emotional intelligence or even emotional resilience, which is super important, and that no ChatGPT, no youngster, as I would say, can deliver that. So the understanding of how an organization works in these kind of critical situations is certainly the most valuable point that us, the Silverfoxes, we can provide to the table. Now, even if you look on FINMA, the Swiss regulator, in terms of what they're looking at when a new chief compliance officer is presented by a Swiss bank, they do the so-called fit and proper test. What does that mean? It means they look into your CV, personality, in terms of not only whether you're a proper fix or fit for the bank, but if you're really as well having the qualification and the professionalism which is needed in terms of bringing that to the next level. So, having said that, I don't want to make here a question mark be on youngsters or people that are only for 5 or 7 years within the business. I think the balance that we can find between senior people and young people in terms of discussion, value added to the chain of authorities and validations is hugely important and can be, of course, the real game changer whenever it comes to that. Now, based on that, I would see our life for the Silverfoxes still good. The Economist said at the time that a man as of 48 is the most happiest. I would say compliance officers, the Silverfoxes, as of 50 and beyond, are certainly the most happiest and can thrive in their career. That would be my secret for today. This was it for today on longevity and compliance, and why Silverfoxes are still good in what they do is, if you are in a Silverfox in compliance, you're not outdated, but you're indispensable. And if you're a young person, get yourself a mentor. In the best case, a Silverfox, to get to the next level and learn of how apps and ChatGPT and AI can be a good foundation, but experience and expertise is even better and brings you to the next level, even to survive some regulatory earthquakes. My name is Ralf Ebert. I'm the Compliance Coach, looking forward for you to see you on my next episode. Comment on whatever you need, whatever you have seen, thinking and impacting compliance differently. See you soon.